Hello, welcome everybody to the latest in our series of ENO for Center for Transportation webinars. Today we are discussing how women travel with Chelsea Richer, Claudia Galicia, and Meghna Khanna. Chelsea is an associate at Fair & Pierce who specializes in active transportation planning, vision zero and multimodal safety improvements, transportation demand management, and climate adaptation and resilience. Claudia is the Senior Manager of Transportation at LA Metro and serves on their Women and Girls Governing Council. And Meghna is the Senior Director of Countywide Planning and Development at LA Metro, primarily focused on transit corridor planning, transit station location and design, station area plans, TOD planning, and transit policy and design manuals. Today, our speakers will be discussing their study in LA County on understanding how women and girls travel. We will have plenty of time for questions at the end. Please feel free to enter the questions in the question box on the side of your screen at any time, and we're going to get to as many of those as possible after the presentation. And with that, I will hand it over to our presenters.
Thank you. So this is Claudia. Thank you for the intro. I'll talk a little bit about the project background and how the idea came about. So in 2017, LA Metro started the Women and Girls Governing Council. And so a little about that. Metro has a strong workforce of 11,000 employees, with women making up 29% of the workforce. And WGGC, as we refer to the council, is committed to assessing policies and practices through a gender lens in order to advance progress towards gender equality and attract women to professions that have been primarily male-focused. We also are interested in reducing transportation and mobility challenges for women to get to jobs, schools, childcare, healthcare, and overall address women's transit needs. And so, LA moves 1.3 million people daily, and 55% of Metro bus riders and rail riders are women. For a long time, women's needs have been lost because they haven't been measured. And the first cohort of WGGC made a recommendation based on gaps they found in existing data. Much of the data that Metro collected either did not collect gender or did not separate and analyze the data by gender. So the idea for the study was born within WGGC and was a true, bottoms-up approach to addressing an issue.
This is Chelsea. I'm going to talk about the methods that we employed in this study. So we really approached this project to look first at the gaps and then fill in those gaps with new data collection. We looked at a few existing data sources. We did a literature review. We reviewed 9 Metro data sources that did have gender data available, and we disaggregated by gender. We looked at the National Household Travel Survey and the California Household Travel Survey to look at trip-making habits and travel behavior that was already available from those existing sources, so we wouldn't have to duplicate and ask about redundant questions in our own survey, and we could dig a little deeper into some of the other questions that we cared about. We looked to some conventional methods for our primary data collection. We conducted 3 focus groups, 2 with women, 1 in English and 1 in Spanish, and 1 with men. And we also deployed a web survey sampling over 2,600 people, and we oversampled women with the intention of really being able to dig in and disaggregate even further subgroups of women. And then we deployed a few innovative methods that really relied on the field of ethnography. First, the participant observations, where we had researchers out on bus lines and rail lines conducting observations at all times of the day. And we had participatory workshops where we had groups of 15 to 25 women with specific populations as the focus of those workshops to really understand more qualitative information about their perspectives. And finally, we had 3 pop-up engagement events where we asked a pretty simple, straightforward question about what makes folks' trips easy and what makes it more difficult, just to get, again, that qualitative input in real time from real riders. We hosted these at 3 of the most heavy transfer stations during rush hour on weekdays. So we were able to engage real live riders in real time during their trip.
So this is Meghna. After collecting all the data, we tried to categorize this data into these key themes that are listed here based on some of the literature review we had done and some of the key concerns that we heard as we were collecting these data sets. So these are the key topics that we have categorized the findings through, and I'll walk you through some of the key findings. So for the overall travel behavior, we noticed that women use public transportation more often and make more multi-stop trips. Women are making 7 or more trips per day, and women in the age group of 35 to 54 reported the highest trip rate of 4.5. I do want to emphasize this, that 61% of women's trip on all modes are 10 miles or less. So again, women are making short trips. Women overall travel behavior, again, one thing to emphasize, men are more likely to travel at rush hour, while women are more likely to be part-time workers traveling off-peak when our service is less frequent. So those were some key overall travel behaviors. But talking about overall transit behavior, women ride our system more. 51% of our rail riders are women and 54% of our bus riders are women. And as women riders, as you know, overall the transit ridership has been declining on various systems. Women transit ridership continues to grow while male ridership continues to decrease. And 90% of our female riders use the system more than 3 days per week. And top reasons for women riding the transit system in LA region is that they don't have a car, they want to avoid traffic, and they don't have a driver's license. Again, similar to the overall travel behavior, women are traveling during the midday, 12 to 4. This is where our frequency generally tends to drop. And women are making these short trips within 10 miles, and it accounts for 74% of women transit travel. And one key finding was 57% of our female riders bring their children on transit. So that was a key finding that we found as we did collected data through different survey methods. On safety aspect, which is a key concern, the largest barrier to riding transit for women in the LA region for our current, previous, and never ridden metro riders is that they don't feel safe. 60% of our female riders felt safe riding metro system in the day, but that number dropped to 20% during the night. And top changes that we heard that women would like to see on our system, they would like to see more transit police nearby or other people nearby. Again, that idea of having more staff presence. Lighting was a key concern. And one thing we heard over and over again, that women prefer more security presence than these technological solutions like security cameras or CCTVs, etc. Women tend to travel with bags, carts, and strollers. That's something we noticed on our system. Over 80% of the complaints related to strollers are made by women. Again, going back to the fact that 57% of our transit riders are bringing their kids onto the system. So, of course, women are traveling with strollers. And many female riders have trouble reaching the stop bars and buttons from a seated position. So again, these were some of the challenges associated with accessibility, particularly related to the vehicle design. With this, I'll turn it back to Claudia, who will talk about the affordability aspect.
So the core finding of all existing evidence is that women are responsible for a disproportionate share of a household's travel burden, at the same time having more limited access to means of transportation. So women use the system more, women are a larger portion of the population, and women have different travel patterns than men and have different commute demands. We've been hearing a lot lately about the pink tax, and our research shows that our system does impact women's budgets disproportionately. Women earn less annually, as you can see there are median household incomes for males and females, and they're likely to spend more on transit because they cannot afford the upfront cost of a monthly pass. or because they're traveling with others in their care. And another possibility is because they may feel the need to pay a premium for rideshare at certain times of the night for their safety. As previously mentioned, only 20% of women feel safe at night. Some other things we learned by separating data by gender is that men and women prioritize differently. Frequency is a big concern to female riders, as is speed and reliability. Many women and many people in general don't work traditional 9 to 5 jobs, and it seems that the system is designed to best accommodate those types of jobs, but we are working on addressing that.
So for convenience and comfort, this is Meghna again emphasizing 3/4 of our women transit trips are less than 10 miles, and yet 44% of their trips take 60 minutes or more. And this is a result of the fact that they are transferring during their trips. So 45% of female bus and 57% of rail riders transfer, and they wait more than 15 minutes for these transfer activities, so just adding to their time. So those were the key things that we heard from the convenience and comfort aspect as we conducted our different research methods. So as part of this 9-month study where we collected all this data for the women transit riders, our next step is to develop a gender action plan. And as part of the action plan, we would like to prioritize these 4 key areas. We want to focus on our safety, look at the key policies that we currently have, the stuff we have heard from our understanding how women's travel study, and then come up with recommendations for the safety aspect. We do want to focus on the fair policy, again, as Claudia mentioned about the affordability aspect. Women are traveling with children. Right now, our current Metro TAP card is associated with only one person, which makes it a bigger issue for women traveling with children or families. So we do want to look at our fair policies. We do want to address that service provided by the time of the day. We've over and over heard women are traveling during that midday when our frequency drops. So we do want to address that as part of this gender action plan. And we do want to talk about the station, stop, and vehicle design, which can accommodate for those strollers and carts women are traveling with. We are currently working on a scope of work for this gender action plan, and within few months, we will be bringing on a consultant that can start helping us work on this gender action plan and prioritize the areas that are listed here. And with that, I'll just turn it over to Alice so we can answer some questions.
Great. Thank you guys so much. This is a fabulous study, and it's really great to see LA Metro and the community looking at these issues and working on this. We have a bunch of questions coming in. One of the questions is about looking at other demographics, and in some of your statistics, you talked about different types of women users. How much does this study look at income levels and race, and do you think there's more work to be done there as well?
So in the report itself, there's a lot more data than what we managed to squeeze into 15 minutes, less than 15 minutes. We did look at different income levels. We looked at different ethnic groups, and we also looked at gender nonconform, or like the trans population, because that's a big vulnerable population. So we explored all of those various groups, and it's important because LA is such a big place and it's such a diverse place, and there's lots of different needs, and we will do our best to address all those needs.
And I just want to add, as we get into the gender action plan, we are also planning to do more surveys related to some of the travel diaries to understand the trip chaining. We will ensure that other demographics and race and ethnicity and other vulnerable groups as we try to collect data through our innovative methods, reaching out to disabled population, homeless population, we will continue to do that as we develop the action plan.
Excellent. And we will link to the report on our webpage where the video of the webinar and the slides will also be, so people who want more information can find it easily there or through LA Metro or probably through Fair and Fierce as well. Can you guys talk a little bit more about some of these safety aspects and both actual safety and perceived safety and what you have in the action plan that can help work on both of those topics? And then there's also a couple specific questions about safety and modes. And so how do the perceived and actual safety on transit between modes, bus and train, but then also other modes like personal vehicle or biking or walking, how do those statistics compare?
Right. So safety, again, is one of those topics where, we want to ensure that as we heard through the surveys and focus group and some of the key findings that indicate that people would like to see more security presence on our system, we also want to be sensitive about not over-policing because our transit system travels to various geographic areas and there is some concerns about over-policing. So we are trying to find that balance as we work on the agenda action plan with our safety group here. We want to look at the ideas of transit ambassadors. San Francisco BART right now does that where, these transit ambassadors, they are not wearing the uniform, but they are just general people there to watch out and help you when needed. So we are trying to explore safety measures in terms of increasing the presence, but not at the same time giving that perception of over-policing. And in addition to that, it's also tied to the fact that the we want to look at our station, stop and vehicle design, especially for the station design and the access to the station, increasing lighting for the sidewalks, and also ensuring that our bus stops are lit and they are located in a way that there is more eyes on the street. So we are looking at those things as we develop the agenda action plan, working with municipalities because most of the local bus stops are on cities' jurisdictions. So we want to develop some guidelines for our station stop design, and for our rail station designs, we'll continue working on improving some of the key things that we heard about lighting or the material choices or how the maintenance issues. So those are the things we want to work on when it comes to safety.
I think another thing that, and I like how in your question you specified safety and perceived safety because those are two different things. But something that will help is having service more frequently because if you don't feel safe, and you're waiting for a half an hour, that can really cause some anxiety and have you feel vulnerable. But if the service is coming more frequently, then you're just less exposed, and that is something that's going to be changing soon with our next gen bus study.
I'll also add.
Excellent. Go for it.
In the report, there is a lot of information from our survey and also from other data sources that show statistics about perception of safety, but also statistics about the crime statistics and the complaints that Metro's system takes in and categorizes. So some of it is about perception. There is also information in the report about actual safety concerns that are experienced by women, men, and non-binary people. So there is some good comparative information there. The report doesn't get into anything beyond transit mode around safety.
Great, thank you. And that transitions well into the next question, talking about sort of service changes and changes in ridership. So it looked like from some of those charts that you showed that ridership trends are changing, not just in terms of with taking it, but that also has an influence on when they might be using the services. So if there are more women using transit modes, and women are more likely to be traveling at off-peak times than men, do you think we can expect to see changes, now or moving forward that are significant enough to to really look at where ridership is peaking or where it's steady, and how we should redesign systems to think about that.
So yeah, I think that's one key thing that we really want to focus on, because we do see that the ridership has been declining on our system, but that's a result of many factors, and that could be a topic of discussion on its own. But we are seeing that women ridership continues to increase. So we are doing a next-gen bus study at LA Metro, which is looking at restructuring our bus system. And through that study and our study, we found the same thing, that women are traveling during this midday, where they are using the service when the service frequency falls. So as part of the next gen bus study, we are looking at addressing that concern and looking at the frequency of our service, because it's not limited to now these peak hours. Those peak hour is spreading, and it's more like 24/7. So we are looking at our frequencies to address some of that concern, and that will be, as we develop that gender action plan, we'll continue working with NextGen to improve those service frequency questions.
Great. From a kind of broader perspective for the people listening, especially people at transit agencies or organizations that work with transit agencies, what do you think is the best way for other agencies and areas to take the work that you've done and take this report and figure out how to apply it in their own context?
That's perfect. So as part of the gender action plan, this is one thing we really want to do. We want to conduct an agency-wide workshop, like other agency-wide workshop, where not only do we want to share our lesson learned that we have heard through this study, but we also want to learn from other agencies, because I think all agencies are facing similar issues. Safety is an issue across all the agencies, declining ridership, service provided by time of the day. So we do want to do this other agency-wide workshop as we develop the gender action plan, so then we can share our lesson learned and at the same time learn from them and bring their best practices into some of the things we are going to recommend as part of the gender action plan. And we will be more than happy to data.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? It cut out just for a moment.
I was just saying we would be happy to share all our data sets or anything other agencies would be interested in. We are very open to sharing that information.
Great. There were a number of questions that came in about that too, so I'm glad you answered that without me even having to ask. So here's a question about funding. In looking at federal funds, and I think this could be applied also to state funds or other funding opportunities, is there a way that you can target service for women and children and women and girls around existing sort of legal frameworks like the Civil Rights Act to be able to best utilize money to help bolster plans like this?
I think that's a great question, but we are not there yet. As part of the gender action plan, we will be identifying actions related to these priority areas. And in addition to that, we want to work with our funding group here, identify some funding sources that we can use. There are a lot of grants for, first last mile, as you were bringing the access issue, improving the access to the station area. There are some funding available for the safety aspect. So we do want to explore that, but we are not there yet.
Got it. Great. Well, if anybody comes up with an answer to that, please share it with all of us.
Definitely.
Can you guys talk a little bit more about the trip purpose aspect? And is there any data that you weren't able to get into this presentation, looking at different trip purposes, and also maybe just access? So trip purposes that we don't see because of less access to goods or services or education or jobs, or differences. You mentioned a bit about travel time.
Sure, yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. We saw generally a pretty substantial difference both across all modes, but also specifically across the transit mode in terms of trip purposes for women compared to men. Women really took a lot more trips that served the household, and are in the service of care of others compared to men's trips, which are more sort of evenly split across categories. And we looked at categories like work trips, household errands, social and recreational, trips to transport someone else, meal-related trips, school-related trips. And so we found that across the ones where someone else is also being served, like household errands or transporting someone in particular, those were higher percentages for women than for men, and lower percentages in the work category. In particular, that was where the main difference came in. And that was true for both, generally across all modes as well as specifically across transit.
And I do want to say that one limitation of our data set was that we weren't able to find too much on the trip chaining, that concept that we've heard that women trip chain and they're making these short trips during the day. So that's one thing we want to dive deeper and maybe do a travel diary when we get into a gender action plan to get more information on the trip chaining aspect.
What we were able to find related to trip chaining was really more around the idea of complex travel making or trip making patterns, where there were more stops just in general over the course of the day that women made compared to men. And I think Meghna shared this statistic early on, but women are more likely to make 7 or more trips a day than men, but also more likely to make 0 trips a day. So those ends are a little bit wider for women than for men in terms of the hypermobility, but also the complete lack of mobility. And so I think to your point about what trips aren't women taking because of these mobility and access challenges, that really comes through pretty strongly in the trip count per day information, just showing that, more women than men are actually not mobile at all.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Thank you. You mentioned earlier that a lot of agencies are seeing ridership decline, and this is something that people are concerned about. Do you think that really working on these gender issues and trying to improve transit for women and girls, is this a potential to see ridership increases, or is it more improving the quality of service for the people who are already riding?
I think it does both, because I think the way we see it, if you're addressing the issues of the vulnerable section of the population riding our system, you are making the system safer for all. So that's one of the key things that we see, that by addressing some of these issues, we might be able to address some of the issues related for all the people who are using our system. That could lead to making our system safer and better for others to use and attract some of the riders who, we hate to say this, but the choice riders, we might be able to attract those. So that's the key goal of creating a gender action plan and working towards issues associated with the women. But there are other factors related to the ridership decline that we need to address. Our Office of Extraordinary Innovation is also doing a the customer experience
yes.
plan. So I think those are the other initiatives that might help us improve our ridership overall for the system.
Great. And can you talk a little bit about some specifics? You talked about design issues for elements that generally affect women more, such as space for bags or strollers, and the heights of the stop request cords. Are you far enough along in that action plan to talk about some of the specifics of how you would redesign transit vehicles and what the challenges that come along with trying to do redesigns might be?
We are not there yet, but some of the ideas we do want to explore that are vehicle design, especially for the buses and the rail. We want to make sure there's space that doesn't compete with the wheelchair space for the strollers and bags. So as we are getting into the procurement for our new rail and buses, we do want to work on the redesign of that. And as part of the gender action plan, we are thinking maybe we'll bring an expert in who is an expert in vehicle design, and we can work with that expert to look at the vehicle to accommodate the needs of the women and make sure that it's not competing with other uses.
But I will say that even though the gender action plan is sort of like the next step to this study, there are lots of other things that are happening in the agency that sort of feed in, the study informed, or the council has made other recommendations. For example, one of them being putting placards on some of our seats, so we don't have to redesign, our cars and our buses, but we are going to start soon putting placards for priority seating for like pregnant women, and encouraging people to offer up their seat to people who need it, women or disabled. It's already disabled people, but giving that priority as well.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We're already a minute over. Thank you, Meghna and Chelsea and Claudia, for your time and for this great research and fabulous presentation. We will have a recording of the webinar and slides up on our website, enotrans.org, at the same webinars page where you were all able to register for this webinar. I also encourage you to sign up for Transportation Weekly, our valuable source on all things transportation, and to check out our next webinar, which is Thursday, February 6th at 2 p.m. on Baltimore Region's MTA Core Bus Performance Monitoring Program. Again, thank you to our presenters so much. This was great, and thank you all for participating and joining us this afternoon. Have a good one.